In the choking dust of Lynn, Indiana, 1931, Jim Jones was born into a house as hollow as a coffin. His father, a war-ravaged phantom, was haunted by mustard gas and whispers of moonshine, his silence a wall no child could breach. His mother, Linda, a rebel with eyes like shattered flint, sneered at sky gods, her defiance branding her the town's outcast. From this barren cradle rose a preacher with a voice like molten gold, weaving dreams of equality in a world scarred by segregation's blade. The People's Temple bloomed under his spell, its pews a mosaic of black and white faces, its sermons ablaze with miracles that mocked reason. But beneath Jim's halo burned a darkness, pills fueling paranoia, affairs shattering vows, and a hunger for control that devoured his soul. In Guyana's jungle, Jonestown rose as a promised Eden, only to rot into a prison where loyalty was weighed in cyanide. How did a boy craving love lead 909 souls to their doom? This is the pulse-pounding saga of Jim Jones, a tale where hope curdles into horror, where faith becomes a noose tightening with every word. Picture the jungle's suffocating breath, the glint of poison in a tin cup, the screams swallowed by silence. Will you dare to follow Jim to Jonestown, where sermons turn to shrieks and the ground weeps with the fallen? Brace for a story that claws your heart, unraveling the razor-thin line between savior and monster, leaving you breathless and haunted by its shadow. On May 13, 1931, James Warren Jones, Jim to the few who bothered to know him, drew his first breath in a sagging clapboard house on the frayed edge of Lynn, Indiana. The town was a forgotten sketch, its streets choked with coal dust that clung to skin like a second shadow, its fields withered under the Great Depression's merciless grip. Jim's father, James Thurman Jones, was a relic of World War I, his lungs scarred by mustard gas, his spirit a husk draped in a faded coat. Disability checks clinked into the mailbox, cold and meager, but they couldn't buy warmth. He slumped in a creaking armchair, his eyes vacant as the gray sky, his breath heavy with the rumored tang of whiskey. The truth of his drinking was a ghost no one could catch, but to Jim, he was a void, a father whose silence was louder than any shout. Linda, Jim's mother, was a storm in a woman's frame. Her chestnut hair was yanked into a tight bun, as if tamed by sheer will, her voice sharp as a switchblade slicing through the piety of 1930s Indiana. She scoffed at religion, calling any deity a sky god with a curl of her lip that sent neighbors scurrying across the street. "Stay away from that house," they'd whisper, as if her atheism were a contagion that could seep through walls. Linda buried herself in factory shifts, her hands calloused from sewing machines and late-night scrubbing, her heart sealed shut to the son she never wanted. "My childhood was loveless," Jim later said, his voice a low rasp, each syllable a wound carved by years of neglect. Lynn's streets were a map of America's divides. Black families huddled in shadowed alleys, their homes leaning like tired sentinels, while white folks claimed the sunlit center with smug certainty. Jim, a lanky boy with eyes that burned with questions, felt the world's cruelty like a splinter lodged in his chest. By 15, he was an oddity, striding to school in pressed white shirts and church slacks, their creases sharp as a preacher's promise against the town's drab flannel. Sports were a clumsy dance for his gangly frame, but leadership was his pulse. He rallied neighborhood kids into a ragtag baseball team, their bats scavenged from broken fences, his voice cracking with authority as he barked orders from the dusty diamond. The thrill of control lit his eyes, a spark in the gray of Lynn. At 16, Jim began haunting the town's churches, slipping into pews where the air hung heavy with wax and old hymnals. Baptist sermons droned like distant thunder, Methodist prayers felt like chains forged from duty. He craved something alive, something to fill the hollow where love should have been. By 17, he carried a Bible like a talisman, its leather cover worn smooth by his restless hands. On street corners, where farmers bartered over wilted cabbage and bruised apples, Jim preached with a fire that stopped the world. "God sees no color," he'd shout, sweat beading on his brow, his voice a thunderclap splitting the humid air. In a town that clung to segregation like a sacred vow, his words were a spark in a powder keg, reckless and radiant, drawing stares of awe and fear. At 17, Jim took a job at Reed Hospital, scrubbing floors slick with vomit, the air thick with antiseptic and the coppery reek of blood. He carted away the grisly spoils of surgery, amputated limbs, their weight heavy in his hands, bandages soaked red and discarded like fallen soldier. The hospital's sterile halls echoed with moans, but Jim moved through them with a strange hunger, as if he could mop away the world's pain. Medicine called to him, a fleeting dream of healing bodies, but a deeper pull stirred, a need to mend souls. In 1948, he met Marceline Baldwin, a nursing student with a smile like spring dawn and a heart that bled for the broken. They walked Indianapolis's gritty streets, their shoes scuffing against cracked pavement, their talks of justice weaving a bond as strong as iron. In June 1949, they married under a sky bruised with clouds, Marceline certain she'd wed a man whose faith mirrored her own. But Jim's belief was a chameleon, shifting with every shadow. "I don't believe in your sky god," he told her one night, his voice edged with his mother's scorn, his eyes glinting with a defiance she hadn't seen. Marceline's hands trembled, her Bible clutched like a lifeline slipping through her fingers. Their arguments rattled their tiny apartment, scripture clashing with skepticism, her prayers drowned by his reasoning. In the 1950s, divorce was a scarlet letter, a brand that would mark Marceline as broken in a world that demanded women stay whole. She stayed, her heart knotted with hope she could bridge the chasm between them. Her love a fragile thread stretched taut. Jim found his true altar in the black churches of Indianapolis. Unlike the white congregations, where worship was a duty performed in starched collars and hushed tones, these sanctuaries pulsed with life. Gospel choirs shook the rafters, their voices soaring like hawks freed from cages. Women in vibrant hats swayed like willows, men clapped with calloused hands, children spun in the aisles, their laughter a hymn of its own. Jim, pale and lanky, was embraced like a prodigal son, his hunger for belonging sated in their warmth. In 1952, at 21, he became a student pastor, his sermons a wildfire of scripture and rebellion. "God demands justice," he'd roar, his fists slamming the pulpit, sweat staining his shirt like a map of his fervor, his voice a beacon in the smoky air. But Jim bristled under the church's leash, his vision too wild for their rules. He dreamed of a sanctuary where he could weave Christianity with New Age mysticism and a fierce cry for equality, a place where the world's divides would dissolve. In 1954, he rented a storefront, its windows fogged with grime, its floorboards creaking under the weight of his ambition. Community unity was born, a kaleidoscope of black and white faces shoulder to shoulder, a defiant act in a city where segregation was a brick wall mortared with hate. Marceline, ever the silent engine, scratched out sermon schedules and budgets, her pen steady as Jim's voice filled the room with promises of a world reborn, his words a flame licking at the hearts of those who listened. Community unity grew like a fever, its pews groaning under the weight of new souls drawn to Jim's vision. The storefront, with its peeling paint and flickering lights, was a pressure cooker, too small for the swelling crowds that spilled onto the sidewalk. But money was a ghost in their low-income neighborhood, where families counted pennies for bread, their hands worn from labor. Jim refused to beg his members. They were as broke as the church's sagging beams, their pockets empty as the promises of a better tomorrow. Instead, he turned to spectacle, his voice booming like a carnival barker in a tent revival. "I command your headache to vanish," he'd cry, pointing at a congregant who'd clutched their temples, then sigh with feigned relief, their eyes wide with rehearsed awe. The crowd gasped, coins clattering into collection plates like rain on a tin roof, their clinks a chorus of belief. Skeptics demanded proof, their eyes narrowed like slits in a fortress. Jim got cunning, planting loyal followers, stooges in the crowd, their faces schooled in trembling devotion. "My cough is gone," one would shout, her voice breaking with scripted joy, her hands raised as if touching heaven. Word spread like wildfire through Indianapolis's alleys, and Jim began guest preaching at other churches, his plants staging healings of heart defects or tumors. At one revival, a woman leapt from her seat, her arms flailing like a marionette, screaming she was cured of cancer, her eyes glittering with a lie so bold it sparkled. She'd never been sick, but the crowd didn't know, their gasps rising like a tide. Donations flooded in, a river of coins and crumpled bills, enough to buy a new home. A former Jewish temple, its stone facade carved with the word temple, weathered but proud. The People's Temple was born, its name a prophecy etched in stone, its walls trembling with the weight of Jim's ambition. Jim's crusades spilled into Indianapolis's streets, where segregation was a blade cutting the city in two. With his diverse flock, black, white, young, old, he led peaceful protests, their signs steady as they stood outside white-owned diners and shops, the air thick with the scent of fried grease and defiance. "Serve all or serve none," Jim declared, his voice a whip crack slicing through the midday bustle, his eyes burning behind his glasses. When owners caved, their doors creaking open to all, Jim rewarded them with a tide of customers, handing out flyers listing approved businesses scrawled in Marceline's neat hand. The temple's followers became a lifeline for small shops, their cash registers singing as coins poured in, Jim's name echoing in awe and fear. He was a savior to some, a rabble-rouser to others. his shadow lengthening with every door forced open, every heart won. By 1965, Jim's ambition outstripped Indianapolis's narrow streets, its segregation a chain he could no longer bear. He moved the People's Temple to Ukiah, California, a sleepy town cradled by redwoods, their branches whispering secrets in the fog. 50 to 60 followers trailed him, their suitcases stuffed with faith, leaving behind jobs, families, and roots for a man they saw as their Moses. But Ukiah was no Canaan, its quiet a damp blanket on Jim's fire. The church faltered, its message muffled in the rural hush, its pews half empty. Jim's marriage cracked like dry earth under a relentless sun. He and Marceline had 4 children, 1 biological, 3 adopted, their faces a rainbow of the equality he preached, their laughter a rare light in his darkening world. But Jim's heart was chained to the church, his family a shadow in his periphery. His drug use, once a murmur of pills to fuel marathon sermons and soothe sleepless nights, roared into addiction. Amphetamines sharpened his tongue to a razor's edge, his words slicing through crowds like a blade. Sedatives dulled his trembling hands, their shake hidden from his flock. His eyes, red and weeping like open wounds, hid behind dark sunglasses he claimed shielded others from the holy glow of his soul. His followers, mesmerized, averted their gazes, as if staring into a furnace that could burn them to ash. "Don't look too long," he'd warn, his voice a low purr, and they obeyed, their faith a moth drawn to his flame. Jim's ego swelled like a thunderhead, black and heavy with promise of a storm. He began affairs with younger church members, their adoration a drug stronger than any pill. He preached fidelity, honor your vows, his voice ringing from the pulpit while bedding his flock in the shadows. When he confessed to Marceline, bedridden by back pain that knifed through her days, he framed it as necessity, his voice smooth as oil. "I love you," he said, his hands gentle but unyielding, "but you can't give me what I need." Marceline, trapped by pain in the church's web, nodded, her heart splintering like glass under a hammer. In a brazen act, Jim stood at the pulpit, his mistress in the pews, her eyes downcast as he spoke. "I'm human," he said, his hands spread like a martyr's, his sunglasses glinting like obsidian. The crowd, stunned into silence, clapped, their loyalty a noose tightening around their necks, their cheers a hymn to his power. The People's Temple spread like wildfire to San Francisco and Los Angeles, its thrift stores a patchwork of donated coats, chipped teacups, and faded dreams, their profits funding college for low-income teens. Tuition, books, dorms carved from creaking houses that smelled of mildew and hope. Jim's miracles grew brazen, a theater of deception. Nurses, planted in crowds, slipped chicken livers into throats, their slick weight hidden in clenched fists, then held them aloft as cancers purged by Jim's power. "Behold the healing," Jim bellowed, his voice a thunderclap, as gasps rippled through the room like a wave. Crowds bought $5 photos of him, their faces glowing in black and white, their donations mailed in envelopes heavy with faith. But Jim's paranoia festered like a wound, his sermons laced with warnings of FBI and CIA agents lurking in shadows, their phones tapped, their names marked. He banned movies, romance, alcohol, distractions from his couples were buried in temple duties, scrubbing floors, sorting donations, their hands raw, their hearts tethered to Jim's will. The church was their universe, and Jim was its sun, his light both blinding and burning. By 1973, Jim's paranoia and ambition collided like storm clouds, their rumble shaking the earth. He needed a sanctuary, a fortress beyond the government's reach, where his vision could reign unchallenged. His followers scouted the globe, their maps stained with coffee and hope, settling on Guyana, South America, a land of tangled jungles, and forgotten rivers, its 850,000 souls clinging to the Atlantic coast, leaving the interior a green abyss unlinked by roads. Perfect for a man who craved isolation, his heart a locked vault. Jim preached that Jonestown, as he named it, was their salvation from America's coming doom. Martial law, concentration camps, a racist purge that would tear them apart. "They're coming for us," he warned, his voice a hiss over crackling speakers, his sunglasses a dark mask hiding eyes wild with drugs, his hands trembling as he gripped the microphone. In May 1977, Jonestown rose from the jungle's grip, its wooden cottages raw and splintered, hacked from vines that seemed to pulse with malice, their leaves dripping with the promise of rain. Hundreds arrived, their faces bright with hope, their suitcases sagging with dreams of utopia. But the dream rotted faster than a corpse in the humid air. Cottages were packed like tombs, families sleeping shoulder to shoulder on thin mattresses, their breaths mingling in the stifling dark, the air heavy with sweat and despair. Water was a trickle, fouled with silt that tasted of earth and ruin. Showers were a myth, and members were told to seal their lips against the poison, their tongues dry as bone. Food was a grim litany of peanut butter sandwiches, their bread stale, and Kool-Aid, its cloying sweetness a stain on their throats, a mockery of nourishment. Jim's cabin, though, was a palace carved from the jungle's heart, a generator's hum powering a refrigerator stuffed with soda, fans stirring the thick air, soft beds where he lay with Marceline and his mistresses, their whispers drowned by the jungle's ceaseless hum. A camp radio, its wires snaking like veins, let his voice boom over loudspeakers, a god whispering from the green abyss, his words a chain binding every soul. Jim ruled like a tyrant, his word a blade that cut through every choice. Every seed planted, every hammer swung, every kiss stolen needed his blessing, his nod a decree etched in stone. Mail was a battlefield, letters torn open, their secrets spilled under his unblinking stare. Outgoing notes had to sing Jonestown's praises, their words scrubbed of doubt. Anything less was rewritten, the writer's hand guided by fear. Privacy was a ghost, its shadow banished from the camp. Rule breakers were exiled to the jungle's edge, forced to run through mud that sucked at their shoes, their meals eaten alone under the canopy's glare, their plates holding scraps no one else would touch. No one could speak to them, look at them, as if they were erased, their existence a stain on Jim's utopia. His drug use spiraled, pills popped like candies, their bitter taste a spark in his veins, his temper a live wire sparking in the equatorial heat. Nightly meetings dragged past midnight, his voice weaving tales of CIA plots and racist armies, his words slurred by drugs, his sunglasses glinting like obsidian in the torchlight. Armed security, their rifles flashing like fangs in the flickering flames, patrolled to protect Jonestown. But their true task was to cage its people, their eyes cold as they watched for escape. Passports were locked in Jim's cabin, their pages a taunt to those with empty pockets. Escape a fever dream in a world of control. The CIA is hours away, Jim said, his sunglasses a void, his voice trembling with drugs and dread, his hands clutching the microphone like a lifeline. They'll slaughter us, enslave our children, tear us apart. He pointed to vats of dark liquid, their surface glinting like oil under the flickering flames, their smell bitter and wrong. Drink, and deny them victory, he urged, his voice a command wrapped in velvet. Children went first, their small hands clutching tin cups, tears carving tracks through the dirt on their cheeks, their sobs swallowed by the jungle's breath. Adults followed, some sobbing, their hands shaking as they raised the cups, others numb, their eyes fixed on Jim as if he were God himself. The liquid burned their throats like acid, its taste a poison they couldn't name. Then Jim laughed, his grin a slash of white in the gloom, his voice a cruel lilt. "It's not poison," he said, his hands raised like a showman's. "You passed the test." Relief flooded the pavilion like a tide, their faith a chain forged anew, their cheers a hymn to his power. They'd die for him, and he knew it, his ego swelling like a storm, his sunglasses hiding eyes that gleamed with triumph. Back in the US, whispers of Jonestown grew into a roar, their echo reaching newsrooms and living. Families received cryptic letters, or none, their words stilted, their pages heavy with fear. Ex-members spoke to reporters, their tales of captivity and abuse staining headlines like blood on paper. Jim's paranoia spiked, his sermons a fevered litany of government plots. His voice slurred as he warned of tapped phones and marked names. In November 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan landed in Guyana, his plane slicing through the humid sky like a blade through flesh. He came to probe rumors of coercion, his notepad a weapon against Jim's empire, his questions sharp as thorns. Jonestown staged a masquerade, children sang in ragged choirs, their voices thin but forced, meals were piled high with food no one could eat, smiles carved onto hollow faces like masks on corpses. Ryan's eyes narrowed, his pen scratching notes that cut too close to the truth. On November 17th, as Ryan prepared to leave, a handful of followers slipped notes into his hand, their eyes pleading like trapped animals. "Take us with you," they whispered, their voices barely audible over the jungle's hum. He nodded, his jaw tight, leading them to a truck bound for a nearby airstrip, its tires crunching on gravel. Security, their eyes cold as gunmetal, their rifles glinting like fangs, opened fire, bullets chewing the dirt like hungry beasts, the air sharp with gunpowder and fear. The truck swerved, tires screaming, escaping into the jungle's embrace, its passengers clinging to each other, their breaths ragged. At the airstrip, armed followers descended, their rifles barking like rabid dogs, their faces twisted with a loyalty that had curdled into madness. Ryan fell, blood pooling like ink under his body, his notepad fluttering uselessly in the dust. 3 journalists and 1 defector crumpled beside him, their screams swallowed by the tarmac's heat, their bodies broken on the sun-scorched ground. 11 others were wounded, crawling through dust as bullets sang, their blood mixing with the earth. Within hours, 909 were dead, their bodies sprawled in the pavilion's shadow, a carpet of loss under the jungle's unblinking stare. Jim's corpse lay on the stage, a bullet through his skull, likely self-inflicted, his mistress beside him, her blood mingling with his in a final, grotesque embrace. The next day, Guyana Defense Force troops pushed through the jungle, their boots sinking in mud thick with decay, the air heavy with the stench of death, sweet, sickening, inescapable. Bodies lay like broken dolls, their faces frozen in rictus, some with injection marks, scars of resistance crushed under the weight of Jim's will. American troops arrived, their faces pale under helmets, finding $700,000 in cash stuffed in suitcases, their bills damp with jungle sweat. Millions more hidden in bank accounts across the globe. The FBI poured over 60,000 pages and hundreds of tapes, each word a shard of the nightmare, each scream a wound that wouldn't heal. Over 400 bodies, bloated and unrecognizable in the jungle's relentless heat, went unidentified, their names lost to the humidity that devoured flesh. They were buried in a mass grave in Oakland on May 11, 1979, the earth swallowing them with a silence that echoed Jonestown's end. The temple's churches were shuttered, its assets seized to pay victims' families, their grief a wound that bled through generations. Jonestown was the greatest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until 9/11, its shadow a scar on history. Lawsuits piled like wreckage, families blaming the government for ignoring cries that rang out too late. Jim Jones began as a boy chasing love, his heart set on a world without walls, his voice a beacon in a segregated land. But drugs, power, and paranoia twisted him into a monster, his sermons a siren call that led 909 to their grave. The final tape, a cacophony of cries and Jim's calm lies, is a scar on the soul of humanity, its echoes, a warning carved in blood. Charisma can light a fire, but unchecked, it burns everything to ash, leaving only silence in its wake.